You're listening to Stealing from Wizards, Volume 2, Burglary, by R.A. Consul. Chapter 29, A Silver Bracelet. Given how many times Kuro had visited the school nurse over the past 2 years, he knew very little about the man. He was very good at his job, which Kuro appreciated. He had a gentle touch and a compassionate tone. When he asked about Kuro's injuries, there was never a hint of judgment or accusation, just a need to know what he needed to fix. He left the interrogations to the principals. His office was a place of healing and treatment. Despite regular visits, however, Kuro realized that he had never learned his name. He knew nothing about the nurse beyond that he had salt and pepper hair and a mild Akkadian accent. Who was he? How did he end up on Avalon? Where did nurses learn their trade? He considered these things to avoid thinking about the stitches going into his shoulder. The nurse had numbed it with a salve, but Kuro found the idea of being sewn back together more distressing than the pain of it. "All done," said the nurse, inspecting his work and nodding with approval. "Well done staying so still. It's a good clean cut, and if you take care of it, it should heal just fine." Kuro nodded obediently. "Come by every morning for the next 4 days, and I'll check your bandages and give you a potion to help speed the healing. Don't pick at these stitches. The spider silk should dissolve on its own and fall out when it's ready. I'm going to put your arm in a sling now to help keep you from using it. Do you have a classmate who could take notes for you for a few days?" "I'm left-handed," said Kuro. "Well, that is fortunate, I suppose." The nurse stepped away and started to clean up. "We're all finished here, but you're welcome to stay and rest a little if you like." Kuro wondered why he would want to, but the nurse gave a meaningful look at the door. His office was a haven, but something was waiting for him in the hallway. A principal at best, but likely something worse. Kuro had managed to avoid the fallout from the morning's adventures for nearly an hour. He dumped the delirious doctor outside Principal McCutcheon's office, left the sleeping Bindle with the luton at the lodge, and tried to patch himself up. He never really expected to get away with the whole thing without being found out, but his instinct was to hide everything, and it was a hard habit to break. Vice Principal Flint had been the one to find him. He was full of accusations and questions related to drugged students, unconscious servants, and fires inside the historical sites. Being covered in his own blood gave Kuro a brief reprieve, but being mildly stabbed only delayed the inevitable. A gentle knock at the door brought the nurse away and left Kuro alone with his thoughts. A lot had happened in a very short time, and Kuro had been more concerned with surviving the ordeal than contemplating the details of what had been said. That man was one of Kuro's creators. The heir to the Summer Throne was on Avalon. Somebody was trying to overthrow the royals. Bindle was Kuro's older brother. The last of those was the one that Kuro dwelled on. The others were too big for him, but the idea that Kuro had family, even an unwilling and unknowing family, was something he could get his head around. He found he liked the idea more than he expected. He felt his relationship with Bindle matched well what little he knew of siblings. They didn't much like each other or get along very well, but Kuro couldn't help but care for the annoying creature. He wondered if Bindle would be okay. He had promises to keep, people he had to obey. He might vanish forever the moment he woke up. Kuro took the nurse's invitation to avoid the outside world as long as he could. He napped, flipped through his textbooks absently, and tried and failed to find ways to keep his raccoon from getting into every drawer in his bag. His reprieve was ended by a quick, sharp refusal by the nurse from outside the room. "Absolutely not," he said. "This is a medical office, not an interrogation room." Kuro couldn't make out the words of the person he was speaking with, but he recognized the tone. It was a casual growl, a threat coded in civility. A wolf in guard's clothing. "I don't care if you're the Winter Queen," replied the nurse. "He's in my care. He'll speak to you when he's well enough to do so, and not before." Kuro appreciated the nurse trying to protect him, but he could only avoid Dubois for so long. There was no sense in the nurse getting on the bad side of the hounds. "You got here fast," said Kuro as he left the examining room and found the nurse facing off against the hound in the waiting area. I was already on my way before we heard anything about you, replied Dubois. A third of the students at the school being drugged overnight tends to get the guard's attention. The nurse interrupted. You don't have to speak to him now. You can wait till you're properly rested and the principal is present. It's okay, said Kuro. If he was going to arrest me, he'd have done it already. The nurse didn't like that answer, but he allowed them to leave. Dubois led them to the room where Kuro normally met with his social worker, Sabine. He walked in as though it were his own office and dropped into the armchair Kuro usually sat in. Close the door, he said. Once Kuro had settled into Sabine's chair, Dubois put on his serious business face, the one that implied that he might eat Kuro if he didn't like what he heard. I'd like your version of events from this morning. It was said in the way that made it seem like he already knew everything Kuro was going to say, and the only purpose of the conversation was to catch Kuro in a lie. Kuro had the problem of not knowing exactly which of the things he or Bindle had done were illegal. Even if he was willing to expose himself to danger, he had to protect Bindle. He'd promised. He explained what happened in the cell with the doctor as best he could, leaving out any details about the Luton and just sort of skipping any explanation as to how he got out of the locked, burning, smoke-filled death trap. Dubois was not immediately interested in the obvious gaps in Kuro's story. Instead, he asked, "Did the doctor say who he believed the summer heir to be?" "No," replied Kuro. "It was written on the vial, but I never saw it." "Would you tell me if you had?" asked Dubois very seriously. "Sure," said Kuro. "That's royal stuff. Nothing to do with me." Dubois visibly relaxed at that. "It probably wasn't really them anyway," he said, but it sounded like he was trying to convince Kuro of it more than accept the fact. "The doctor, Vincent Penfield, is clearly delusional. He keeps switching from ranting about the glorious revolution and grand plan of the master to worrying that his duties as a servant are being neglected. He doesn't seem to know anything beyond what he was trying to do, though. His brain is a disaster. It looks like Phineas's work." "Is he here?" asked Kuro fearfully. "No," said Dubois. "We double-checked. He's still in his cell in Niflheim. When asked about Vincent, he responded by laughing himself silly. There's no reason to believe the doctor has been in contact with anyone in years. It looks like they set him up to carry out this task and then left him. In the interim, just about anyone he might have worked with has been rounded up. He's just a wind-up toy to them, set in motion and then forgotten. I doubt anyone expected him to succeed." "That's a lot of work for nothing," said Kuro. "That's how Claudius Roche operates," replied Dubois. "He's the master Vincent rants about. He likes to make big bets with long odds, using people as currency. It costs him nothing to sacrifice years of someone else's life in the slim chance of a big payoff. He wiped out the whole royal family of Tiernanog that way. He was responsible for the coup d'etat, raising a small army and assassinating the entire summer court, but didn't lift a finger to carry it out. Manipulating a stray into checking if the missing summer heir ended up here on Avalon is a trivial expense, and the identity of that person is worth a lot. If they were ever found, they'd be the most important person in the realm, the rightful ruler of Tiernanog." "And now the doctor knows who it is?" asked Kuro. "As it turns out, no, he doesn't," said Dubois with a wolfish grin. "He had a solid dose of a memory-affecting anesthetic. You're the only one who remembers what happened in that room, and it was so entirely destroyed by the fire that there's no way to determine who he imagined it to be. So if you don't know, nobody knows. In fact, you may be the only person who knows he succeeded." "Besides you mean," said Kuro. "Me? I think he's a lunatic," said Dubois. "His brain has been through a blender. I can't trust a thing he says. Besides, he's just a stray. What would he know about these things? I personally confirmed the identity of every child that could possibly be the heir years ago. The only unaccounted for child at this school is you, Kuro. And we've already ruled you out. The heir probably didn't survive the coup. If they did, maybe it's better for them that they're never found. Everyone in the realm would want a piece of them. A child ruler would be manipulated, bought, sold, maybe even assassinated." The hound seemed almost happy that the name had been lost, that the heir he'd spent years searching for would remain a mystery. "You already know who it is, don't you?" said Kuro. Dubois leveled a ferocious grin at Kuro. "Don't be ridiculous," he said. "I've spent my career hunting for that child. It's my greatest failure. Everyone knows that. Do you think I would abandon my duty, sacrifice my honor, break the law, commit treason, just to protect a child? Who do you think I am?" The menace was so thick in the room that Kuro didn't dare answer, but he knew. He had been allowed to see behind the mask. This was Sir Talon Dubois, Knight Commander of the Hounds, the Dread Wolf, Loup-Garot, Fenrir Sulfur, the most feared man in the Three Kingdoms. The wolf that walked at his side was a pale reflection of the relentless ferocity contained within the man. The uniform he wore was just a disguise, making him appear tamed, a collar he wore for the comfort of those around him. These were things that Kuro already knew, truths that Dubois shared openly. But in his deadly smile and cunning glare, Dubois shared a moment of deeper honesty. He was a wolf through and through, and a wolf protects their pack. There were things that Sir Talon Dubois, Knight Commander of the Royal Guard, could not say or do or know, that Talon Dubois the man would topple an empire for without hesitation if it meant protecting something he cared about. Kuro nodded slowly, silently consenting to join Dubois' conspiracy of ignorance, though he didn't do it out of fear, but from a shared understanding that it was the best way to keep safe whomever the heir might be. "So I'll ask again, do you know who Dr. Penfield thought was the summer heir?" "No," said Kuro with all the certainty and honesty he could convey. "He didn't even test all the vials, and the testing syrup boiled over. It might not have been working correctly." The feeling of a pending storm that had been building in the room subsided. "Maybe that is for the best," said Dubois. "It would impede my investigations and cause a stir if you started spreading rumors." Kuro nodded along in understanding. "That brings us to another matter." Dubois pulled a silver bangle from his pocket and toyed with it while he spoke. It was bright and new, covered in intricately carved runes that shone as he moved it, as if reflecting light from a source that wasn't there. "It seems, despite my request to the Luton to keep their distance and not interact with you, you managed to learn some of their magic anyway." Kuro sank in his seat. After all of that, he was going to be arrested again. "Is that illegal?" "No," said Dubois. "As you've already discovered, there are few laws against things that can't be done. However, if you keep doing them, there soon will be." Kuro let out a sigh of relief. "The Luton, though, have agreements, limitations, places they're not allowed to go, or allowed to try to go. It's important that they uphold those treaties for their own protection. According to Ingot, you could break those rules. In fact, I believe you were designed to." "It doesn't work very well," said Kuro. "I can't do it without a real Luton to help." "That's part of the problem," explained Dubois. "You could bring a Luton anywhere you've been, and the normal barriers that stop them don't affect you. You could breach palaces and prisons. You've already been inside the Granite Citadel. As nice as it might be to have you pop by for afternoon tea, it poses a security risk, and there's no reason to believe you wouldn't improve with practice." "What if I promised I wouldn't?" offered Kuro. "Not good enough," said Dubois. "I might trust it, but nobody else would. People in power have already been calling for you to be caged, just in case. The less charitable ones have called for worse. Now that we know you can do it, I haven't much choice." Gloom overtook Kuro. He wondered if he'd even be allowed to say goodbye to his friends, or if he'd just be made to disappear. "Catch!" said Dubois. Kuro was startled from his self-pity and hurt his shoulder scrambling to grab the shiny bracelet spinning through the air towards him. "What's this?" asked Kuro. "It's an anchor. Svartalfar design. Thing's worth more than my house. Among other things, it keeps Luton from blinking place to place. Put it on." It was a large hoop, big enough to easily fit over an adult's hand, but as soon as he passed his through, it shrunk down to fit around his wrist. Kuro tried to stretch it back out and pull his hand free, I can't get it off. That's kind of the point, said Dubois. And don't try too hard. I'm told it'll explode if it's cut. It's better than a prison cell, though. At least I hope it is. So if I wear this, I can stay? I don't have to go to prison? As long as you can keep from drawing too much attention to yourself and getting into more trouble, yes. It was a small price to pay, Kuro tried to tell himself. He'd only just learned to travel like a Luton. He wouldn't be missing much if that were taken away. At the same time, he'd just found a form of freedom, and he was being shackled for it. Wings he'd used for the first time were being clipped. The island was once again a cage, as it was intended to be. Dubois pulled himself out of the armchair and headed out of the private room. I think we're done here, he said. They exited the school to find Dubois' familiar, Garmer, menacing the children on the lawn, and Ingot using the big wolf as a leaning post. How's Bindle doing? Talon asked the Luton. Kuro grumbled quietly to himself. He had carefully removed all mention of Bindle and the Luton from his retellings. As per usual, Dubois had known everything already. He had allowed Kuro to lie to him only because it served his purposes at the time.
He's still a little dopey, but otherwise well, all things considered, said Ingot. He'd like to see Kuro again before he goes, if that's okay.
Sure thing, said Dubois. I'll meet you at the lodge. Kuro had avoided talking about Bindle at all, hoping that he had somehow escaped the attention of the hound, but that was clearly a lost cause. Is he in trouble? Asked Kuro. Less than you, replied Dubois. The Luton look after their own. He'll be watched and anchored, but he'll be cared for too. They'd start a war before they'd let another wizard lay a hand on that boy. He has promises to keep, said Kuro. He was worried that restraining the Luton could be a death sentence if it forced him to break his obligations. He did, said Dubois. But unlike the magic that binds you, it seems promises can be released. I can be fairly persuasive when required, and the good doctors saw the wisdom of cooperating. Kuro understood well enough not to ask for details. The walk back to the lodge was slow. Dubois made a parade of it, letting the students get a long look at them together, making sure that they once again knew that when Kuro was still at the school tomorrow, it was because Knight Commander Talon Dubois had allowed it. The Luton were waiting at the lodge for them. Not just Ingot. At least half the lodge staff were there, along with a good number Kuro didn't recognize, and Bindle along with them. He wore a silver bangle, like Kuro's, but it dangled around his neck like a collar. He was flanked by older Luton. One held his hand and the other his shoulder. They were holding him firmly, but not like a prisoner. It was more like they couldn't bear letting go than they had fear of him fleeing. The Luton parted to let Kuro approach their wayward child. Are you okay? Bindle nodded sleepily, the adult-sized dose of anesthetic not quite worn off yet. He smiled dreamily and said, Yes, I'm going home. You're a good monster. Kuro couldn't help but smile. Even a rescued Bindle, freed from his promises and surrounded by his own kind, was still Bindle. Take care of yourself, said Kuro. Come visit if you can.
I can't go very far,
the little Luton replied and tugged at his shiny new collar.
But I can write.
Kuro cringed and looked at the other Luton, not certain who should explain that they no longer delivered Kuro's mail.
I should say something,
interrupted a Luton in a postal uniform.
We were given instructions by the Royal Guard not to interact at all with you.
Kuro looked to Dubois, who crossed his arms and evaded Kuro's glance, like a child who'd been caught with his hand in a cookie jar. I didn't actually mean for them to stop delivering your mail. I just meant to stay out of sight. The postal Luton continued.
The order has since been rescinded.
He vanished and appeared a moment later with a sack, which he presented to Kuro. You kept my mail? Kuro said in surprise as he inspected the contents. There were letters both from him and to him. Letters from Charlie, Arthur, and even Ms. Crawley. There were solstice presents as well. A novel called Wildland Werewolves from Sabine, and a fine brass magnifying glass for investigating mysteries from Arthur.
Of course.
The Luton was offended that Kuro would even imagine otherwise.
We are caretakers of the mail.
He stood to attention, gave a kind of salute, and blinked away. Most of the other Luton blinked off as well, but a group of them walked with Bindle towards the shore. Kuro stayed with them as long as he could and watched them vanish through the veil. Even after Bindle was out of sight, he could still feel him. He knew he was there, really knew, and even without holding on to him, he felt like he could have followed. He almost wished he had. Maybe there was a family for him among the Luton. But then, he already had a family at the school. A small, strange family of friends who'd chosen him, and whom he fought to keep hold of. People he wasn't ready to leave behind. "He'll be well looked after," said Dubois after the last Luton was out of sight. "Can't ask for a better family than the Luton." Kuro laughed. Like a wizard, Dubois didn't recognize that the Luton were still only a few feet away, and could hear him clearly. The miles of the bay that separated the island from the shore didn't exist for them. Kuro just waved and wished them safe travels. Dubois released Kuro at last and allowed him to return home to his friends. Not only did Kuro have to explain what had happened that morning to them, but he had to explain what had happened the night before as well. The anesthetic had so muddied their memories that it had all become a messy dream to them. Having already done it once before, Kuro could do a better job of things the second time. He had fewer secrets to keep and could tell them all about Bindle properly. Arthur was overjoyed to have the mystery solved, and Kuro made sure to congratulate him for his diligent sleuthing. Nonetheless, Charlie claimed most of the credit. "I was right!" she proclaimed. She thrust her fists in the air victoriously. "About what?" asked Arthur, trying to recall anything helpful she'd contributed. "I said that the burglar was trying to find the summer air," she replied, still in her victory pose. "You said a lot of things," argued Arthur, and that was Kuro's idea. "Nope, I thought of it first." Charlie and Arthur continued to debate whether an absurd theory that Charlie had proposed, which nobody but her remembered, counted as solving a mystery. What stopped them was not any kind of agreement, but a spell being cast by Marie. They had all forgotten about Marie's familiar, and she only half remembered their conversation in the woods. Kuro had started his stories by handing her 2 books with dog-eared pages, and leaving her to rediscover the truth about her familiar as he introduced his raccoon and talked about his adventures with Bindle. This time, rather than a summoning full of shame and doubt, she proudly conjured her raven in the middle of the room. It stretched its wings and flapped over to perch on her shoulder, while Arthur and Charlie fell briefly silent before exploding in praise and surprise. The celebration and congratulations of the spectacular familiar overshadowed anything else from that morning, letting Kuro slide quietly back into the background, where he belonged. Just like that, it was over. School exerted its inescapable force and dragged Kuro back into the routine of classes and assignments. The rumors about what really had happened that morning were replaced with gossip about who liked whom and dreams of the summer vacation that lay on the far side of a mountain of projects and exams. Kuro let the weeks pass, allowing himself to fall out of the attention and suspicion of his classmates. Even the Avalon Royal Defense League gave up on chasing him, as Moira reluctantly yielded to her father's evaluation of Kuro's innocence, and both she and Azalea discovered that they needed to put in effort to passing final exams. On the last day before the ferry would return them across the bay, while Charlie and Marie were busy flying their familiars around together, and Arthur was off tolerating a visit with his sister, Kuro sat by the spring shore rereading his letters. He took his time, enjoying the solitude and the sunny afternoon, letting his raccoon investigate holes beneath trees and the insects hiding under rocks. It had, over the past few weeks, grown bolder and more curious. It spent less of its time hiding and more of its time out in the open. It even, on occasion, let itself be seen by wizards other than Kuro and his friends. Kuro's peaceful reading was interrupted by his raccoon fleeing from the nearby bushes, running past Kuro, and diving headlong through the veil. Kuro panicked that the foolish thing had just doomed itself, but rather than dissolving back into its constituent thoughts out in the bland lands, as it should have, it vanished like a rock thrown by Bindle. Kuro didn't have time to investigate. He felt a cold stare settle on him. Kuro turned to find the owner of that stare emerging like a wraith from the forest. Azalea, ghostly pale and clad in black, stepped into view, but kept within the shadows of the trees, just out of reach of the sun. Kuro considered following his raccoon. For a moment, he thought he could. He could feel it just a few meters away, watching him, waiting for him. Something about Azalea's gaze gave him pause, though. It lacked the cunning or malice she usually wielded. "It wasn't you," she said, as though informing Kuro of shocking new information. "No," Kuro confirmed, "but I understand why you thought it was. Even I thought it was me for a while." "And you really didn't read my diary?" she added, perhaps hoping that he would give her license to renew her attacks on Kuro. "I couldn't if I wanted to. It was ruined when I first saw it." Rather than the refusal to believe him that Kuro expected, Azalea visibly relaxed and let out a sigh that was equal parts relief and disappointment. Then she gathered herself up and stood to attention, placing her fist over her heart. "I, Azalea Lamorak, Squire of the Summer Court, sworn protector of the throne of Tirnanog," she said it in the same formal tone she had used to challenge him to the duel, "rescind my allegations against you, Kuro Hayashi." "Sorry, what?" asked Kuro. Her formality crumbled. She hunched her shoulders and looked away. "I'm trying to apologize," she said. "Oh, okay," was all Kuro could think to say. "Why?" "Because I am honor-bound as a future Knight of the Sun to do so. I wrongly accused you of a crime." Azalea was unsatisfied with a peaceful resolution her knightly duties demanded. "I still haven't forgiven you for hurting Bella, though," she said, trying to rekindle some animosity between them. "Are you going to try to kill me again?" Kuro asked, uncertain if he should have started running much sooner. "Not until you do something else to deserve it," she replied. Kuro nodded his understanding of her standing threat as she withdrew. "See you at home," she said before disappearing entirely into the thick ferns of the spring forest. It had been a strange conversation, and he wasn't certain whether Azalea had apologized or declared war, but that was partly because he had trouble paying attention. The whole time, he had the unmistakable feeling of being watched by a raccoon. His familiar was looking at him across the veil. It was an uncanny feeling. When he faced away from the veil, it was undeniable, but when he looked in the direction of the stair, it seemed impossible, so he closed his eyes. If he didn't look, he knew he was being watched, and he knew where he was being watched from. He forgot about the smells of spring, the feeling of sun on his skin, and the sounds of the bay. Instead, he focused all his attention on that feeling of eyes upon him, and walked towards the familiar he knew was waiting for him just a few yards away. He didn't stop until he tripped over a tree root. He fell forward, landing on a soft, furry cushion that hissed a complaint. He opened his eyes to find his familiar much less excited at Kuro's arrival than he was. Kuro turned and looked behind him at the veil he'd just crossed, and the churning bay that was no longer a barrier between the school and the rest of the world. He returned to dinner that night with a grin he couldn't explain to his friends. Dubois might have clipped his wings, but he had left the door to his cage open. Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.